Good evening, this is Greg here, aka New York Prepper, and tonight I want to talk to you guys about EMPs. I want to do a basic discussion on them and talk about, why preppers prepare for EMPs, what they are, and why they're so devastating and so dangerous to our society. And so I hope that you find this video interesting, especially if you're new to prepping, or even if you're a seasoned prepper and you've been around for a while, and you know everything about EMPs. It'll probably be interesting just to rehash it in your head and watch this video, and maybe you can provide some of your comments. I always enjoy reading what other people say and, learning from other people, because there's always a lot of smart people out there and a lot of very well prepared people, so you can always learn from other people, right? So I definitely look forward to reading your comments on this video, especially all of my videos. I like reading the comments. So what is an EMP? An EMP is basically an electromagnetic pulse. That's what it stands for. And all it is just a pulse of high voltage. I guess, I don't know if somebody should correct me on that. It's a pulse of high voltage that can damage electronics and electrical systems. The best way to visualize it, and the way that I visualize it in my head, is that an electromagnetic pulse is basically like the opposite of a lightning bolt. A lightning bolt is a lot of high voltage, but it's focused into like one particular area. Like, you have that bolt of lightning that comes from the sky and it hits like one particular spot, and it's very strong. It's a lot of electricity, but it's focused, into one area. It's like a laser. Versus an electromagnetic pulse is basically the same exact thing as a lightning bolt, except rather than being focused into one area or one bolt, it spreads out, in all directions. So it's kind of like, in a way, it has a lot of the same energy as a lightning strike, or obviously a lot more, because it's covering a big area, but it spreads out in all directions, which makes it very dangerous because, well, not dangerous physically, but dangerous to our society because of the damage it does to our electrical power supplies, our power grid, electronics, computer chips, computers, anything that will conduct electricity will accept that high voltage from the pulse, and it'll fry, circuits, anything sensitive to that high voltage. If it's not rated to handle that voltage, it's going to melt. It may melt wires. It may cause, fires inside of homes, fires inside of buildings, because the voltage is going to be higher. There's going to be more electricity flowing through the wires because the wires are going to absorb the pulse, and as a result they may melt. They may cause fires. That's more like a lightning strike, but it's pretty much the same thing. But it has a greater effect on computer chips, electronics, things like that, more so than power lines and things like that. Although they can take down power lines, which is one of the reasons why preppers are very fearful. I don't know if fear is really a good word, but it's one of the things that, if you're a prepper, an EMP is kind of like one of the main things that you should be prepping for, or that you are prepping for, because the EMP could be very devastating. And there's the EMP was actually discovered by accident, during nuclear missile tests in the 1950s. There was one of the tests in the Pacific. I forget specifically which one it was, but I know it was like an H bomb. I think it might have been the Castle Bravo test, and it caused the EMP to travel, all the way from, I don't know, where do they, trying to think, what's that name? Is that the, those islands that they always do the testing on, where they tested all the nukes, and a pulse traveled all the way to Hawaii from there, and it caused street lights to go out, it caused light bulbs to burst. So you can imagine in a modern society that's so dependent on electricity, electronics, pretty much everything in our world is built on electricity, refrigeration to keep our food cool. Electricity is responsible for transportation, for providing heat. I mean, it's such a critical thing in our society. We don't even think about it because we just flick the switch on and it comes on. But once that electricity is gone, you're going to be left with spoiling food, crumbling infrastructure. It can cause a lot of problems, as you would think, right? So that's why people prepare for EMPs. And there's two types of EMPs. There's natural and there's man-made. The natural EMP comes from the sun. The sun has explosions on the surface, and when those explosions are called flares. And when there's a big enough flare, it sends the radiation to Earth, and that radiation causes an electromagnetic pulse when it interacts with our atmosphere. I believe, I don't know the actual science behind it, but so there's a natural one, which is solar flares, and then there's the man-made one, and the man-made ones are caused by nuclear missiles. And like I said, the man-made EMP was discovered by accident, so now a lot of the governments in the world are actually building specific missiles designed to generate a stronger EMP than a typical nuclear bomb would. They're specially engineered nukes that don't give off the same amount of blast or destructive power as like a normal nuke the same size would, but it generates a much more of an EMP, and there's some evidence that North Korea has been working on that, Russia, China, that they're building these super EMPs, and you can read books about them if you really want to get into it, and if you have the time, you can read books about EMP. There was the Congressional EMP Commission, which was basically a commission that was funded by by Congress, to study the effects of an EMP and how well prepared we are. And without getting too detailed, pretty much the EMP Commission determined that our power grid is very vulnerable to an EMP. We don't have any redundancy. We don't have backup supplies that we would need to bring the grid back up quickly. We don't have any way of protecting the critical power lines and power transmission systems. There's no way for us to protect them. We don't have any backups plans. We have no redundancies. Especially the biggest thing is the the EMP, like I said, it's a high voltage, so anything that conducts electricity will take that voltage, and when it's too high, it can cause things to burn out and get destroyed. So one of the things that would potentially happen in a strong EMP would be transformers getting destroyed. And as somebody who, I have some knowledge of the electrical industry. My father's actually an electrical engineer. So growing up, I've always asked him questions, and I always got to watch him, work and stuff, and I learned a lot from him. So it's not like I'm just pulling this out of nowhere, but he basically told me, and now, it's not just him, but, now it's pretty well known that, when a transformer goes down, if it gets destroyed, and I'm not talking about the little transformers like on your local telephone pole outside your house. I'm talking about big transformers that are designed to step down voltage from interstate transmission lines down to, local transmission or local distribution. The interstate transmission lines can have like at least 100,000 or more volts running through them. So when they come to a neighborhood, they can't just distribute that much voltage into homes, right? So those are just like the main arteries for the electricity to flow through. And the transformers are huge pieces of machine, it's a giant like box. And what it does is it steps the voltage down from 120,000 or whatever down to a more manageable level, and then from there it can be distributed to your house and to your neighborhood. Otherwise it would just be too much voltage. It would just, it wouldn't make sense. So, but if those transmission lines, if those transformers get destroyed from an EMP, that can be devastating, because the transformers are custom built usually. They're sized specifically for the particular installation where they're installed, and they're custom made, so replacing them takes months. They have to be built from scratch, in a manufacturing facility. And obviously if the power is down, it's not going to be easy for a company to just start turning around transformers, because even in perfect conditions like now, it takes months for them to make it. So you're looking at at least 6 months in most cases for them to get those transformers back in service. And the problem is that a lot of the power companies, they don't keep spare transformers sitting around. They're very expensive and they're bulky, so they don't just keep spare transformers laying around. So once those blow out, it's a problem, unless they can fail over to other, fail over just means reroute the electricity around that transformer while they fix it, but if we're talking about something like an EMP, which affects a giant area, remember how I said that it spreads out and it affects a large area. So it's not like a localized thunderstorm or localized lightning strike where it takes out one transformer in an area and they can just route the power around it. If it's a giant EMP burst, it'll affect a lot of those transformers, and it's not going to be easy for them to just reroute the power and go around it. So that's the main issue, and that's why a lot of preppers fear the EMP the worst out of anything else, because once our society plunges into darkness like that, all hell would basically break loose. It would just be like the Purge, but even worse. Because there'd be no end in sight. It would just be every man for himself. No law, no order. It would be total chaos. Hell on earth, basically. And so a lot of foreign enemies of the United States and enemies of the Western way of life, like most notably Russia, North Korea, China, they've developed specific nuclear weapons that have the capability of generating a huge pulse that would destroy, basically designed to create that strong EMP effect without not so much, the blast effect. And because in many ways, all they would have to do is detonate, 2 or 3 EMPs, and that may be enough to black out, 2/3 of the U.S. If they, let's say, detonate one over, the Northeast, they detonate one over, LA, that pretty much takes out most of our population, most of our critical infrastructure areas, our stock market, our capital, big economic centers would be taken out and put into darkness, so from their end, it's a very powerful tool for them to bring us to our knees. And that being said, we do have missile defense, so it's not that easy for them to just sneak an EMP through. So on one hand, it's a big threat, but it won't be that easy for them to just launch an EMP, because they would have to, it would trip off all of our warning, systems. Our radars would see it coming, so they would have to deploy it in a secret way somehow. And so basically, I discussed the theory behind the EMP and what it is, but now we can get into how it actually works in the real world. So typically, like, the way an EMP would work is they would put the nuke on top of a missile, the warhead, the nuclear warhead, they put it on a missile, right? And they would launch it just like a normal nuke. However, they don't detonate it close to the ground. They detonate it in the low Earth orbit, like 200 or 300 miles above the Earth's surface, out in space. And that does two things. One, it evades our interception and radar detection capabilities, because it's basically in outer space at that point. So, I mean, I'm not too knowledgeable about what our capabilities are, because I don't work in the Missile Defense Agency, or I don't work in that area or anything, so I can't say that I know everything. But it's definitely a lot harder for us to intercept something that's in space than it is if it's already coming back down and inside of our atmosphere, where our radars and our missiles can see it. But also what it does is it covers a large area. So when that bomb is detonated, like let's say they detonate it over the central U.S., like Nebraska or Kansas, it'll cover like a huge area of the country, and that'll cause the maximum damage to our electrical power grid, our electronic systems, cars, planes, anything with a chip will be vulnerable. So, that's one of the reasons why preppers are so focused on EMPs, because a rogue state could potentially try to launch one. So a country like North Korea is getting desperate, and they just feel like they have nothing to lose. They may just launch one. They may not even care. Yeah, we could retaliate, but sometimes, just because the fear of retaliation may not be enough for some dictators and some people. They may feel that they have nothing to lose and they'll just launch the EMP, or they may get protection from another country, like let's say Kim Jong-un or one of these other guys. They could launch the EMP and then they could go hide in China, or hide in Russia, and then at that point, I mean, what are we going to do? Are we going to go to nuclear war with China? It's hard to say. That would be pretty much the end of the world. So it's always a possibility. It's probably, it's hard to say whether it would actually happen or not, but it's something to prepare for. And then obviously there's the natural EMPs, which could also be as devastating or even more devastating than a nuke or a man-made EMP, caused by a solar flare. And we only need to look into history to see that that's actually happened many times throughout history, where there was a strong solar flare and it caused the power to get disrupted. So I have to brush up on my history. Shame on me, but I should really know this. But there was some incidents, I believe, in the 40s where there was a solar flare. It was really strong and it caused some power outages. And at the time they didn't know what it was, but it's not the end of the world. I'm not making this video so people panic. I'm just explaining what it is and the theory behind it, and you never know what can happen. I'm not saying you should run around with a tinfoil hat on and stop your life and get paranoid about it, but it's always worth to keep it in the back of your mind. And at least now you know what it is. And if you want to learn more, I mean, there's plenty of information about EMPs on the internet. There's the Congressional EMP Commission, which did a study on EMPs, and they basically determined just what I talked about, that the transformers are vulnerable, our power grid is vulnerable. So if we were actually ever hit with an EMP, it would be devastating. It would take half a year to a year at least for us to be restored back to normal. So you would have to basically be able to protect yourself and protect your family during that time period. Because the government's not going to be able to help you. The police aren't going to be able to be everywhere and patrol every house. So it's going to be up to you to protect your family, feed your family. So what I have here is actually a little Faraday bag. What this is this is to protect electronics. I've actually done a review on this before. It's called Tech Protect Faraday bag. I wish there was a way I could test it, but there's really no way I could test it. I don't know how you would test if I could create an EMP and set it off somehow. But what this is just like a little Ziploc bag that's made of Mylar. Mylar is like a type of metallic foil. And what a Faraday bag, this is based on the principle of the Faraday principle, Faraday cage. What that is basically, if you have something like this conducts electricity, the metal here. So if there's a pulse coming, it's gonna conduct the electricity, away from what's inside. It's almost like a grounding rod in a way, and that's what a Faraday cage is. A Faraday cage is just like a metal cage from copper. And if there's a pulse that comes, the cage absorbs that pulse, so whatever's inside of the cage is protected. And that's basically what this bag does. So I'd recommend buying some of these. They're really cheap. If you're really worried about it, you can put like your critical electronics in here. In this one I have a Geiger counter, but you could put like a ham radio in here. You could put your cell phones in here. Any type of sensitive electronics you can put so it protects it from an EMP. Aside from Faraday bags or Faraday cages, you can obviously stock up on food and water, have appropriate tools for self-defense, and practice your skills, and have plans, because gear is not going to save you. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm sorry if it's a little bit long. I just wanted to make sure I explained all the main parts of it. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. Take care and God bless.